If you hated school growing up, this is for you. Because school is not neutral. It never was. School is the first institution that tells a child what they are allowed to be and what they are not. And if you want to understand the story of ADHD, you have to understand this part first. The school system came before the diagnosis, not the other way around. A structure was built around obedience, sitting still, and quiet compliance. And only after that structure was normalized did we create a medical category for the children who couldn't conform to it. So this isn't primarily a medical story. It's a systems story. Modern schooling traces back to the Prussian model, a design created to produce compliant factory workers and obedient soldiers. That design is still embedded in schools today. From the moment a child enters kindergarten, nearly every hour of the day is organized around behavioral control. Sit here. Don't talk. Raise your hand. Wait your turn. Memorize information. Repeat it back. But that is not how children learn. Children learn through movement. They learn by building things, experimenting, copying adults, and interacting with the real world. Human learning is physical, exploratory, and adaptive. The problem is that kind of learning is difficult to control. So instead of redesigning education around how children actually learn, the system replaced real experience with worksheets, schedules, and standardized testing. And here's the critical point. Children who resist this environment are not defective. They are responsive. They are reacting exactly how a healthy organism reacts when it is confined to conditions it was not designed for. But instead of redesigning the environment, the culture medicates the child. And because most adults today were raised inside that same system, they assume the system itself is normal. That's how false baselines are created. You take an unnatural environment, force children to adapt to it, and then label the ones who struggle as disordered. But the real baseline for children is energy, curiosity, motion, experimentation, noise, trying, failing, and trying again. Those are not symptoms. They are developmental requirements. The system doesn't have the capacity to handle those traits, so it pathologizes them. And this is the part a lot of people are uncomfortable admitting. ADHD is not a natural category. It is the result of a mismatch between human biology and industrial education. The behaviors we label as symptoms only become problems inside a very specific environment. An environment built around stillness, repetition, and control. The school system can't change because it was never designed around child development. It was designed around administrative convenience and state efficiency. So instead of questioning the structure, the responsibility gets placed on the child. And once that happens, the label follows them. Not just through school, but through life. Over time, that label starts to shape identity. A child doesn't just hear that they struggle in class. They learn that something about who they are is wrong. The language was created to make them easier to manage, not to help them understand themselves. This is why so many people grow up feeling broken. From a young age, they're told by teachers, peers, doctors, and therapists that their natural wiring is a disorder, that their energy is excessive, that their curiosity is disruptive, that their inability to tolerate monotony is a flaw. But the world didn't break those kids. The system did. And here's where the false logic becomes obvious. The system never asks whether the environment is failing the child. That question is almost never raised. Instead, the conclusion is automatic. The child is failing the environment. That inversion is critical, because once you accept it, the institution no longer has to adapt. Teachers don't need to change their methods. Administrators don't need to redesign learning spaces. The system doesn't need to evolve. All responsibility gets assigned to the child's neurology. And that creates a culture where energy is treated as a problem, where sitting still for 8 hours is considered healthy, and where manufactured boredom is mistaken for maturity. If a child resists monotony, the system doesn't pause and say, "This environment isn't working." It says, "This child is the issue." That inversion has been operating for over a century, and it's how the idea of the abnormal child was engineered. To see how manufactured this actually is, you have to look at the timeline. Industrial education was fully established long before ADHD existed as a diagnostic category. Schools came first. The diagnosis came later. Which means the medical explanation was not foundational. It was a retrofit. A system was built, problems emerged inside that system, and then medical categories were created to explain the problems without redesigning the structure that caused them. And this is where the story becomes more uncomfortable. The same individual who financed the Prussian-style public education system in the United States also played a central role in shaping the modern medical and pharmaceutical systems. John D. Rockefeller, an oil tycoon and industrialist, funded both. Through the Rockefeller Foundation, he helped standardize education and medicine at the same time. The environment was engineered, and the solutions for the symptoms produced by that environment were engineered as well. This follows a familiar pattern: problem, reaction, solution. The system creates conditions that generate dysfunction. People react to that dysfunction. And then the system provides the official solution, without ever questioning its own design. This wasn't driven by concern for children. It was driven by priorities that have nothing to do with child development. The system values consistency, predictability, control, scalability. Any trait that disrupts those values becomes a problem to be managed. Curiosity becomes distraction. Energy becomes hyperactivity. Resistance to monotony becomes defiance. And once those traits are reclassified as behavioral or neurological issues, the blame shifts away from the structure and onto the individual. That shift is critical, because once the child is framed as the source of the problem, the system is no longer required to change. The diagnosis doesn't just describe behavior, it protects the institution. It creates a story that allows adults to avoid redesigning education itself. And as long as that story holds, the structure remains intact. Now let's look at the outcome. Take the same traits that got a boy punished in school: restlessness, risk-taking, hyperfocus, resistance to authority, high physical energy, learning through action instead of instruction. Then place those traits in the real world. What do you get? You get entrepreneurs, engineers, crisis responders, inventors, builders of companies and systems. Those traits aren't weaknesses outside the classroom. They're advantages. The same world that medicates a child at 8 years old will later depend on men like him to build the future. That's not an accident. There's a reason so many founders, innovators, and top performers were labeled problem children. They were never broken. They were miscast. They were placed in an environment that punished the very traits that later made them valuable. And when a child's natural temperament is punished instead of shaped, something deeper happens. They don't just learn how to behave. They learn how to doubt themselves. That doubt follows them into adulthood. This is the real damage. Not the medication, not even the label. The damage is identity. The belief that something is wrong with me. That belief becomes the wound. And once it's there, it creates secondary problems. Anxiety, depression, low confidence, which are then treated with even more interventions. It becomes a domino effect. This isn't progress. It's cultural self-destruction. We've been running this experiment for generations now, and the long-term cost is clear. Shorter attention spans, suppressed creativity, a generation of builders and explorers trained to sit still and stay quiet. Children who could have changed the world were taught to doubt themselves instead. They didn't discover abnormal kids. They invented them. And then they medicated them into compliance. That is the real crime.